This American helicopter is flying over communist-held territory to a town under siege. Kontum in the highlands of Vietnam has been cut off for 6 weeks. And last week, when communists attacked in force, 20,000 civilians were still trapped in the town. Tonight, World in Action looks at the plight of the primitive mountain people caught in the middle of a decisive battle for the center of Vietnam. Kontum could be the key to the battle for the central highlands of Vietnam. 6 weeks ago, the communists launched themselves from their secret bases in the Ho Chi Minh trails and overran the town of Dak To. Then 12 fire bases protecting Kontum were stormed by communist tanks and the town surrounded. If Kontum falls, the Americans fear the communists may strike down and cut the country in half. Trapped inside Kontum, the civilian refugees never escape the sound of battle. The front line is less than a mile away. This mortar pit is being dug in a village on the outskirts of Kontum. The people watching are not Vietnamese, they're the Montagnards, the mountain people of Vietnam. The war taking place half a mile away is not their war. But whatever its outcome, the traditional life and culture of these tribes is certain to be one of the casualties. The Montagnards have darker skins than the Vietnamese, almost round eyes and quite different customs. Since they came to Vietnam from Polynesia long ago, they've lived in small villages of long houses, growing hill rice and hunting with wooden crossbows in the forests. The Montagnards' land covers 2/3 of South Vietnam, but the Vietnamese outnumber the million or so hill tribesmen by 17 to 1 and see them as savages. The Montagnard head man in Kontum is Pierre Yuk.
The situation in Kontum is certainly very serious. The communists are all around Kontum. They're on the edge of Montagnard villages such as this one here, only a mile from the center of the town. But the people want to stay here if they can.
When the communists shelled the town, the Vietnamese fled. This is the deserted center of Kontum, the Vietnamese area.
The Vietnamese have left Kontum. They have homes and relations in the lowlands. They only come to the Central Highlands to trade, to set up shop and take money from us. Their roots aren't here. They have enough money to be able to leave and relations to go to. For the Montagnards, the situation is entirely different. If we leave our land, our ancestral villages, if we go elsewhere, it's no longer our land. Without doubt, we wouldn't have enough to eat. How are we going to survive in a Vietnamese town?
Montagnards have always been a traditional Negro of South Vietnam, and especially in the highlands here. They've always not exactly been slaves, but just not too far above it. The Montagnards are simple people. I mean, they're satisfied with a little bit of land and their family. I mean, there's just not much else to it. They like to be left alone, mainly, which they haven't been.
These people have lived through the wars of Indochina, which began almost 30 years ago. The Montagnards continue to work their land, despite the fighting only a few fields away. But some Montagnards have been given a special role in the defense of Kontum. Their job is to help the Americans hold isolated fortresses close to the Ho Chi Minh trails. American advisors took us 40 miles behind communist lines to a Montagnard camp at Ben Het. Flying at 10,000 feet above the range of enemy guns, the destruction left behind by the B-52 bombers can still be seen. These traditional Montagnard lands are now free fire zones. Any tribesmen who've not retreated to the special camps or to Kontum run the same risks as the communists. Ben Het is only 7 miles from the communists' underground complex on the Ho Chi Minh trails, which the Americans call Base 609. The camp commands the main road from the communist base to Kontum. Ben Het has been under daily rocket fire for 3 months, but the Montagnards are stubborn fighters. This is why they were recruited by the Green Berets who first established Ben Het. This camp is now so dangerous that the helicopters will stay on the ground for only 30 seconds. The Montagnard soldiers at Ben Het live in the trenches and bunkers with their women and children. These tribal families didn't even leave when the battle for Ben Het was at its most intense.
We've taken probably a little over 1,500 incoming rounds in about a 3 to 4 week period. Now that doesn't count what we took during the battle. It's virtually impossible to estimate what they threw in here during that battle. Probably around 2,000 rounds of heavy stuff. What they threw at us as far as small arms is concerned, you can't count it.
A special relationship has existed between the Montagnards and the Americans since the beginning of the war. The Green Berets admired the Montagnards' courage and their qualities as guerrilla fighters, which they contrasted with those of the South Vietnamese.
The Special Forces camps have started around 1962-63. To tell you how long this individual family lived here would be almost impossible unless we asked them. This is where they live, this is where they fight from, other than the women move back to the inner perimeter if there is an attack on the camp. But you'll find some of these people have been here since '63.
Why do they come in from the villages?
Well, we recruit and ask them to join the Vietnamese army. They do, and they bring their families with them. Now you'll find that the Montagnards in this area, or in this camp, are all from this general area. And this is the key to a Ranger border camp, or the old Special Forces border camp, and that is you keep your people in the area where you recruit from. If you take them away longer than a couple of months period, they'll go back to the village.
The Montagnards' fight at Ben Het is vital to the defense of Kontum. The camp lies astride the most direct tank route to the city. Its strategic importance was underlined by the intensity of the communist assault.
At this point, you can see that this is where the main attack is. Back here, you were masked, but you can see one of the tanks down here that actually came in and proceeded to drive the Vietnamese, the friendly Vietnamese, out of the bunker line.
This is the Soviet-built PT-76 tank that very nearly broke into our perimeter. Had this thing got inside of the perimeter, there's no telling the amount of damage this thing would have done before we finally got it knocked out.
Now this is the sector that took the main attack, which is from the east. And about 4 bunkers on each side of this, or 3 on each side of it, is where the NVA got through the wire and into the bunkers. And of course, the counterattack from my rear then had to retake these 4 bunkers. This one happened to cave in from the use of laws, as Bob told you earlier, and then they rolled a barrel of gasoline in and set it on fire. You can see it's still smoking over here to my left.
How many bodies are underneath?
We estimate about 40.
And what do you do with all these dead NVA bodies when you get them? I mean, you had a lot of these.
We burn them. It's the only way. We couldn't possibly bury as many as we got.
The Americans say 1,500 communists have been killed in the battle at Ben Het. Montagnard losses are 110 dead. There are no casualty figures for the women and children.
You're in a typical bunker line where the defense is actually fought for a Ranger border camp. This one is typical of the other 11 camps that I advise and supervise. You'll find here to my left a 30 caliber machine gun, which of course the United States Army no longer uses. This is where the fighting's done. To my right, you'll find living quarters, where the people live during the day, during the night, until, as we said earlier, the fighting begins. At that time, the women then move back to the rear, to the inner perimeter, and the men stay in these positions and fight.
This woman has lived here for 7 years. Her 2 children were born in this bunker. They've never been outside the camp.
The mountain yard is a very primitive type of person. They don't really understand modern technology. Special forces trained them in modern weapons and gave them the weapons that they use. They paid them the first time the mountain yards had ever seen money. They didn't know what money could even do. They gave them clothing, which the mountain yards had never had before. They were like fathers to them. And over the years, as they led them into combat situations, the mountain yard began to trust the American far more than he'll ever trust a Vietnamese.
As the Americans withdraw, the Montagnards are left increasingly vulnerable to the hostility of the South Vietnamese and the onslaught of the communist advance. After 2 hours, we were flown out of Ben Het, leaving behind this isolated fortress, the home for nearly 2,000 Montagnards. All the countryside between Ben Het and Kontum fell to the communists 6 weeks ago. Some of the Montagnards stayed in their villages, but others fled from the fighting and the bombing to Kontum. Last week, there were still some 20,000 Montagnards trapped in the town, and no effective airlift organized to get them out. The dangers that face the refugees are emphasized by the fact that supplies of rice are only flown in on a daily basis in case the town should fall to the communists. One of the 10 remaining American advisors described how the Vietnamese escaped from the city.
The first people who left Kontum were the refugees from the northern part of Kontum province, and the majority of them were Vietnamese. They did get a very few mine yards out to start with.
Why was that?
The province chief ordered mainly Vietnamese first and mine yards second.
These Vietnamese got out when the communist attack began 6 weeks ago. 20,000 Vietnamese escaped in the first few days, but in the 4 weeks since, only 8,000 Montagnards have been airlifted out. Among those left are Bing and his wife Lai, who've been waiting to get out for 3 weeks now. They have 2 children and Lai is 6 months pregnant. To get to Kontum and escape the fighting and bombing in the countryside, Bing and Lai walked 50 miles from their village.
Over 200 of us had to leave our village, Dak Sut, one night. The fighting was very close. We ran out into the forest. We left behind our pigs and chickens. All we could carry was cooking pots and blankets. There was no room for our clothes. We couldn't carry rice. It was too heavy. Yes, we were very scared of the American planes. We heard them drop their bombs. Sometimes they were very close to us. The earth shook, and we saw the smoke rising above the trees. Sometimes they were far away. Then there was a strange rumble.
The The only way for Bing and the other refugees to escape from Kontum is by air. But for weeks the airstrip has been under rocket attack, and war supplies and food have taken priority over people. The Montagnards wait patiently for a lift out on the incoming rice and ammunition helicopters. But they often wait for a long time, for the helicopters are flown by their old masters, the Vietnamese. Bing and Lai have been trapped in Kontum for 3 weeks, but now they're near the head of the queue.
At first we felt safe in Kontum. We were very happy to arrive. But now all we want to do is escape. We've been told that we'll have to wait our turn for a helicopter. There's no other way out for us. We sit listening to the bombs and rockets. We're afraid. We feel we may die at any time.
These Montagnard babies from the Catholic orphanage are waiting to get out, but the Vietnamese helicopter drops its load of rice and flies off empty. The American advisor gave us a simple explanation for the bottleneck at the evacuation point, the extensive corruption among the South Vietnamese air crews.
The Vietnamese Air Force land just over there, their helicopters. Do they pick up these refugees?
Negative. They do not.
Why not?
They will not pick up the Montagnards for the reasons I stated earlier, that they don't particularly care for the Montagnards to start with. That and the fact that they usually get anywhere from about 10,000 piastres a head for refugees that they carry out. There was some of this going on. Money's been seen changing hands several times. The main reason they won't take people out over there is because they're more interested in making money on what they do take out. The Vietnamese Air Force people come down here and buy Hondas at rock bottom price because they cannot be gotten out of the city.
While we filmed, Vietnamese soldiers pushed looted Honda motorcycles onto an empty helicopter. The Hondas are taken to be sold in the town of Pleiku. The Montagnards are left in Kontum. We asked the American advisor why this happened.
Well, it's typical. I mean, it's typical of the Vietnamese way of thinking. They put more value on money than they do of life. I get pretty angry sometimes about, especially when you see a Vietnamese soldier dressed up as a woman trying to get on a helicopter. You kind of want to take a stick to his head.
The irony of the situation in Kontum is that it's the Montagnards displaying the fighting qualities the Americans admire who stiffen the defense lines weakened by Vietnamese desertion and hold the city for the government in Saigon.
I think they're fighting somebody else's war because they're not, like I say again, they're not going to get anything out of it after it's over with. They'll go back to their villages and hamlets and continue to be the bottom man on the pole. The Montagnards in general will stand and fight. The Vietnamese are in general the opposite. Unless they're so far superior, they don't like to stay.
But the North Vietnamese are now so close that American planes are bombing only a few hundred yards outside the town. Meanwhile, the refugees at the evacuation point flee as an ammunition plane is hit by a rocket. Bing and his wife Lai retreat from the shrapnel. No one will be airlifted out on this day, so Bing and his family return to their camp. Life in the refugee camp is not easy. Water is scarce, and the family take what they can from a passing army truck.
Last night we were very scared. A rocket exploded across the road. We all went and lay down in the trenches. The VC attacked with 6 tanks. We were awake all night listening and waiting. The children cried and yelled. We do not know what will happen to us. We do not understand this war. We just want to live in peace. We want to return to our village.
While the air attacks continued overhead, the refugees returned next day to the evacuation point. Bing and his wife Lai were out of luck again. They watched the bodies of soldiers killed at the perimeter being brought to the evacuation point. That day, the evacuation of the dead took precedence over the living. Next day, the 3.5-week wait of Bing and Lai is finally rewarded. They've been promised a place in an American helicopter, but for them it's a moment of mixed emotions.
We're very worried about the people left behind. Some are from our village. We do not know if they'll be able to leave. It makes us very sad. We do not know if we will see them again. Many of our people have died in the war. We've never been on a helicopter before. We're afraid. We do not know where we're going. We do not know how we will eat. We want to find a village like our old one. We were happy in our village, working, planting, cutting wood. This is the month we sow rice. The boys love fishing, the men trap birds. Often we go hunting far away from the village.
There is no place for the Montagnards' way of life in the resettlement camps to the south, which will be the Bing's new home. While the Montagnards take refuge in the fortified bases or the camps with their rows of tin huts, Vietnamese farmers are rapidly taking over their tribal lands. With no land of their own to farm, the Bing's only means of survival may well be to work as labourers for the Vietnamese.
I have heard about the Vietnamese stealing our lands, but I do not know where. We do not like the Vietnamese. They have a different way of life to us.
But at least the Bing family got out of Kontum. In the past few days, the communists have fought their way into the city, and hand-to-hand fighting is now going on in the streets. Kontum was once the French missionary capital of the highlands. Before we left, we spoke to the Catholic Bishop of Kontum about the plight of the remaining refugees. Bishop Seitz has been in Vietnam for more than 30 years, living successively under the influence of the Japanese, the French, the Communist Viet Minh, the Americans, and the government of Saigon. Many of his Montagnard people are Catholics, and the bishop refuses to leave them.
No matter what effort is made to evacuate Kontum, there'll always remain a civilian population of old people, women and children, Vietnamese and Montagnards alike. It's the very poor who will always be here. So I made 2 requests to the authorities, that they send food to this besieged city, and that whatever happens, the people should be spared the bombing attacks. I went to Saigon and asked that no matter what happens, we shouldn't be bombed by the B-52s. I've asked this, written it, and I ask it again. only through pity for the thousands of people who will stay in this city.
Une situation extrêmement grave.
Our plight is very serious. We don't know what our fate will be tomorrow. All we know is that today Kontum is besieged, Kontum is bombarded, that the population is very frightened, but not in a state of panic. There's been no panic here for 4 weeks, but there's deep anxiety because of the situation. We may be under the Viet Cong regime in a few days, we may not be. For us Christians, our faith, without wishing to offend anybody, lies in God, not in men.
Vous avez peur ici? Vous avez peur ici? Peur?
Afraid?
Nous vivons dans la peur.
We live in fear.
Nous prions Dieu.
We pray to God simply not to be afraid of our fear. That's all.
C'est tout.